morning. Today I will be talking about the origin and chemistry of life. So I'll start first with a discussion on the chemistry of life, then proceed with the origin of life. Okay, so for the first discussion on the chemistry of life, let's discuss water. Okay, water is a molecule composed of two hydrogen atoms linked to an oxygen atom. So, water molecule or a water molecule is termed as a dipolar molecule because it has partial negative and positive poles. So, as you can see in this particular illustration here, you have here water molecule, and then the hydrogen molecules are oriented such that they are at an angle, okay, relative to the oxygen molecule here. So this particular arrangement confers, or rather the particular arrangement of this water molecule as well as the component atoms confer to it a partial positive and partial negative poles. This is because hydrogen, okay, is positive, okay, in this case, and then oxygen here is negative, okay. Even if they do share electrons, okay, oxygen is still able to have this partial negative pole, and these hydrogen atoms here have these partial positive poles. Okay, so this is an important feature of water because this polarity allows water to become a very good solvent. Okay, so aside from that, we have this water molecule here, okay, that is also attracted to its fellow water molecule because of the poles. So hydrogen being this part of water, or this hydrogen atom here being partially positive, is attracted to another water molecule's partial negative pole, or this oxygen pole here, okay, and this attraction forms a hydrogen bond, which is very important, okay, uh, to confer important in conferring certain properties of water that make it conducive to life. Okay, so again, water is a polar molecule, and water molecules are attracted to each other by hydrogen bonding. Okay, so hydrogen bonding, hydrogen bonded to an electronegative atom, in this case, the oxygen in the water molecule. Now, water is also capable of forming hydrogen bonds with other molecules. Okay, so here, in this illustration here, we have here NaCl, okay, sodium chloride or your table salt. So we know that salt can dissolve in water, and we can see here, okay, that this big chunk of salt has not yet broken up, but in these portions here, separated portions, you can see that the negatively charged chlorine is attracted to the partially positive poles of water, which is, of course, due to the presence of the hydrogen molecules. In the same way, you can see here that the partially, or rather the partially negative pole of water is attracted to the positively charged sodium atom. Okay, so this structure here is called a hydration shell, and this is how water is able to dissolve these substances. Now, it must be mentioned that water will only dissolve polar substances, or in this case, we call them hydrophilic substances, okay, which include sodium chloride. Okay, you can easily tell which are polar or hydrophilic when you see charges, okay, or let's say um, ionic, okay, substances, okay, those are charged and will be attracted to either the positive or negative pole of water. So in addition to that, okay, water is the most abundant compound in living cells, making up 60 to 90% of volume, and it has several properties that make it conducive to life. Aside from being an excellent solvent, water has a high specific heat capacity, meaning it requires at least 1 calorie to increase temperature by 1 degree Celsius. And this is important because water is able to moderate environmental conditions. So there needs to be 1 calorie inputted, or rather put into water in order to increase its temperature, okay, protecting living organisms from extreme thermal fluctuation. So, in relation to that, water also has a high heat of vaporization. There's a lot of energy, okay, more than 500 calories, to convert water, liquid water, to water vapor. So, um, if liquid water is converted into a vapor, okay, requiring lots of energy, this makes, okay, cooling produced by evaporization important in dispelling heat. So, this is because there is a lot of energy that is needed to convert liquid water to water vapor. So, energy then is removed from a hot system, okay, put into water to convert it to water vapor, and then evaporation. Okay. So, aside from that, water also has unique density behavior. So, it reaches its maximum density at 4 degrees Celsius while it is still liquid. So, as the temperatures plummet, water will also become less dense. Okay, this permits aquatic life. Okay, in the sense that ice being less dense than liquid water will float to the top. If ice happens to be more dense than water, it will sink to the bottom of lakes, for example, and then will cause the liquid on top of it to also freeze. So that's not conducive to aquatic life because it will kill off organisms during winter time. So fortunately, ice is less dense than liquid water. So water also has a high surface tension, okay, or the surface tension is the membrane-like property of, or rather, it looks like a membrane, or it has the property of a membrane, okay, on the surface because of the hydrogen bonding and cohesiveness of the water molecules at the surface. So this is very important for maintaining protoplasmic form and movement. So water also has low viscosity. It can travel through small spaces such as capillaries, okay, and as mentioned, an excellent solvent. So water is also important in chemical reactions such as hydrolysis, which is a process that will split a larger molecule into smaller subunits. So this is very important because hydrolysis, okay, will break down important compounds such as, let's say, starch, breaking it down to produce glucose, which will then be processed to produce more energy. So with that, let's discuss macromolecules. So macromolecules are large molecules composed of thousands of covalently connected atoms. So within cells, these small organic molecules join together to form these macromolecules. And for our purposes, we will call these macromolecules the biomolecules. So there are four classes that you need to concern yourselves with. We have carbohydrates, lipids, proteins, and nucleic acids. So it's worth noting that carbohydrates, proteins, and nucleic acids are what we call polymers. These polymers are long molecules consisting of many similar building blocks. So these polymers are formed by piecing together small building block molecules, which we will call monomers. Okay, so an example of that will be amino acids joining together to form proteins. So when polymers are made, okay, they are made by dehydration reaction. So a dehydration reaction simply removes water. So in this case, okay, you have this short polymer here, and then a building block or a monomer is going to be joined to this short polymer. So for them to be joined together, then water has to be removed. Okay. It's the opposite for breakdown, however, or hydrolysis, because the polymers will be broken down and water will be put in to the system in order to enable this polymer to break down, or the monomer to separate from the others. Okay, so you can see here that this is a larger molecule, a polymer, and then water put into the system. You can see that um, you have this hydrogen atom here bonded to this polymer here, and then this hydroxyl um, molecule bonded to this smaller polymer or monomer that has separated. So this is essentially similar to this one. So in that case, so hydrolysis, okay, of course will require water. So if there is no water in the system, then hydrolysis cannot proceed. Okay. So let's talk about the molecules. Okay, the biomolecules, the first of which are carbohydrates. So carbohydrates are starches and sugars. So they are major source of energy for biochemical systems as well as providing structural um, integrity, or it provides protective structures such as cellulose and peptidoglycan for bacteria. So the smallest carbohydrates are called monosaccharides. So this is the monomer for the carbohydrate, and the polymer for carbohydrates are called polysaccharides, which in biochemistry are defined as more than 10 monosaccharides linked together by glycosidic bonds. So examples of carbohydrates are glucose, okay, lactose or milk sugar, then you have cellulose, which make up the cell wall in plants, and then glycogen. Okay, so please remember the term glycogen. This is the storage molecule, okay, or the storage compound for the storage form of energy for animals. Okay, why am I talking about this? Because we don't have starches. Starches are for plants. Glycogen is for animals. Okay, so let's look at three representative carbohydrates here. We have a monomer here, glucose, and then you have fructose or fruit sugar. Okay, so when they are joined together by a dehydration reaction, they form sucrose or your table sugar. So this is a glycosidic bond. Don't worry too much about this one. Glycosidic bond is just a bond between two sugars. Okay. So the next one is lipids. Okay, lipids are water insoluble molecules. Okay, used for energy production and storage. Okay, hormones, structural elements of cell membranes, as well as vitamins. Now this is important. Lipids are water insoluble. Okay, we can also call them hydrophobic. Okay, so as hydrophobic molecules, they don't take too kindly to water. Okay, that's why oil and water do not mix together. Okay, and why is that? Water, as mentioned, is polar, while oil is non-polar. So that means polar, we can say polar is also hydrophilic, and non-polar or hydrophobic. Okay, so what makes this important as a biomolecule? Because as we can see later on here in this portion, okay, it's important for forming cell membranes or compartments. So to discuss some biomolecules, we have triglycerides, okay, which include fats from animals and oils from plants. Okay, so fat from animal, oil from plant. Okay, so we also have steroids, which are complex alcohols, but are water insoluble, or at least not very soluble in water. They have low polarity, and these include cholesterol as well as steroid hormones, which are derived from cholesterol. So cholesterol is not all that bad. Okay, cholesterol will give rise to progesterone, okay, or testosterone, which will in turn give rise to estrogen. Okay, so some water insoluble vitamins are also steroids. So finally, we'll discuss some phospholipids. I will expound on this on discussions on the cell. So phospholipids have this representative structure here. So we have this hydrophilic head, which is composed of a phosphate as well as an organic base, could be a sugar. And then these hydrophobic tails are made up of fatty acids. Okay, so as you can see in the variety of the components, lipids are not actually polymers. Okay, so they have, although triglycerides have these monomer or components here, they are not really called as polymers. Okay, because they have different building blocks. Okay, so here we have hydrophobic tails. okay, made up of fatty acids. And being hydrophobic, they repel water or they cannot dissolve in water. However, phospholipids have a hydrophilic component which is due to the presence of phosphate, and phosphate is a polar molecule. What happens here? So a hydrophilic head and a hydrophobic tail confer to phospholipids an amphipathic quality. Okay, this amphipathic quality enables the phospholipids to make vesicles or compartments in an aqueous solution. So in short, the cell as a compartment is able to form because of the phospholipid bilayer that is around it. Okay? So something like soap. Soap is also amphipathic. Okay? So it's capable of trapping or rather forming what we call micelles. Okay? Um, not soap, but rather detergent. So detergent is amphipathic and are also capable of forming these vesicles or compartments in an aqueous solution. So more on phospholipids on the discussion on the cell membrane. So an example of saturated and unsaturated fatty acids, you have this. Okay, um, we'll make a distinction between fat and oil. Okay, so fat is solid at room temperature and oil is liquid at room temperature. So here we have a saturated fat. Okay, so a saturated fat here, in this case, a triglyceride that is saturated, you have this glycerol component here linked to a chain of fatty acids. So these fatty acids are composed only of carbon and hydrogen, with a tail that has a double bonded carbon. Okay, so another, not a tail, sorry, this one is the acid component of the fatty acid, but the actual tail is only composed of carbon and hydrogen. So in that case, fatty acid here would be nonpolar. Okay, so this is saturated fat. Now, what differs or differentiates an unsaturated fat from a saturated fat is the presence of a double bond between two carbons, okay, in a fatty acid tail of an unsaturated fat. Okay, so this causes bending of this particular molecule. So more on this on the discussion on cells. Okay, the third component or biomolecule is the nucleic acid. Nucleic acids are for transferring energy, help in catalyzing reactions, and storing genetic information. So nucleic acids are monomers which are made up of nucleotides. Okay, as the nucleic acids being polymers have the monomer nucleotides. So these are composed of a nitrogenous base, a phosphate, and a 5-carbon sugar. So examples are of course DNA, the oxyribonucleic acid, and adenosine triphosphate or ATP, which is very important in energy production. Okay, so basically breaking the bonds between the phosphates in ATP will yield a lot of energy, and that's what drives, okay, many cellular activities. So here is a nucleic acid. So we have a polynucleotide or the polymer, okay, the nucleic acid itself. You have here inset image. So you have here a nitrogenous base. You have a sugar, pentose because it has 5 carbons, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then linked to a phosphate group. Okay, so this is the nucleic acid. So the last one is protein. Okay, proteins are used to produce energy, to synthesize other molecules like hormones. Okay, so enzymes are proteins. Okay, although other substances that have or are called or also have the zyme, okay, designation might not be proteins, such as ribozymes, which are RNA, catalytic RNA. So proteins are also polymers. So they are um, made up of amino acids that are joined together by peptide bonds. making up polypeptides. So what is a protein? Okay, a protein is or has four levels of structure. So you have the primary structure, which is the chain of amino acids. The chain of amino acids is decided by your DNA sequence. Okay, so more on that on genetics, or perhaps yeah, I think in genetics. So the second, the polypeptide chain sequence, okay, will then form, okay, coils or folds, okay, and that is what we call the secondary structure. Okay, the tertiary structure of protein is determined by various intermolecular forces among amino acids. So hydrophobic portions of these amino acids will interact with each other to form a 3D orientation or something like that. Okay, and then quaternary is when a protein consists of multiple polypeptide chains. Okay, we have to make a distinction between protein and polypeptide. Okay, the polypeptide is the polymer of amino acids, but if you have multiple polypeptides that have these various intermolecular forces, okay, joining together, you get the protein. Okay, so meaning the tertiary structure here can be a protein, so will the quaternary structure. So to help you visualize that, I have this image here. So this is your polypeptide chain. Okay, this is made up of many or different amino acids. Okay, there are 20 amino acids in nature. Okay, so they, due to their nature, could be polar, non-polar, the like, they will start to form, okay, coils or folds, okay, in what we call the secondary structure. So they will also further um, form this tertiary structure due to various intermolecular forces, so hydrophobic interactions, salt bridges, and the like. So they form this tertiary structure. Now, if you have several tertiary structures, then they can join together to form the quaternary structure. The best example of this would be hemoglobin, okay, which is made up of different subunits. We have alpha and beta subunits. Okay, so that's the quaternary structure. This is the protein. Okay, but of course, the protein is itself made up of a polymer, okay, the polypeptide. So, the chemistry of the cell also depends on the reactions of smaller molecules and ions. So, small organic molecules include precursors of biomolecules that help enzymes function or are intermediates of metabolic pathways. So, inorganic ions are also required by cells in trace amounts. So, these are the naturally occurring elements in the human body. So, about 96% of human body weight is composed of oxygen, carbon, hydrogen, and nitrogen. Okay, it's worth noting that you have um, these four compounds, okay, are also present in the various biomolecules that I talked about a while ago. Especially for both proteins as well as the nucleic acids, they have all four of these. Okay, of course, nucleic acids also have phosphorus in the form of phosphate, but yeah, these are the rest of the elements. Usually, you'll find them as part of enzymes or making up part of the structures. Okay, and then you have the trace elements. Okay, so with that, we have the four biomolecules. Let's repeat them again. So we have the carbohydrates, we have lipids, we have proteins, and then we have the nucleic acids. So together with water, okay, you have the um, ingredients that are essential for life. Okay, so let's talk about the origin of life. The origin of the earliest form of life can be estimated at approximately 4 billion years ago. Okay, because fossil records reveal life existed approximately 3.8 billion years ago. Okay, and it's been said that the first living organisms were called protocells. Okay, autonomous membrane-bound units with complex functional organization and are capable of self-reproduction. So please take note of this, membrane bound. Okay? So, the origin of life, okay, of course, we cannot just say that these biomolecules appeared out of nowhere. Okay, there are theories as to how these biomolecules came together, but the prevailing theory is the Oparin and Haldane's theory of the primordial soup theory. Okay, so they independently theorized that early Earth atmosphere lacked oxygen. Okay, so nowadays we can't imagine a world without oxygen because oxygen is very important for animals and heterotrophs. Even for plants, they still require oxygen. Okay, so the early Earth atmosphere consisted primarily of reducing compounds such as methane and ammonia. So these reducing compounds, okay, these are um, such as methane and ammonia, and are found in the atmosphere, not very conducive to life. Okay, so what happened? What the theory says is that the comets and meteorites bombarded Earth and repeatedly vaporized seawater. Now, with the vaporization of seawater, so you can imagine um, there is energy. Okay, okay, and then this caused organic substances to form and accumulate in the oceans. So for the organic molecules to form, okay, there must be energy, as I mentioned, that will be put into the system. Okay, and how is this energy, or how, or where this energy come from? So theories include lightning and widespread volcanic activity. Okay, so what happens is basically when bombardment occurred and seawater was vaporized and then there was energy put into the system, then that forced the molecules to rearrange, okay, or rearrange themselves or to form and break new bonds. Okay, so, something like a dehydration reaction may occur or a hydrolysis reaction may occur. Okay, but that's in the presence of large, or rather, a lot of energy. So, something like lightning, okay, provides this energy to form these molecules. Okay, you might notice, however, that we don't need lightning, okay, to, let's say, form glycogen, but that's because of the presence of enzymes. Okay, so to test the hypothesis of, or rather, to simulate the conditions thought to prevail on the primitive Earth, okay, Miller and Urey conducted an experiment in 1953 where they have this compartment here, okay, containing water, methane, ammonia, and hydrogen, and then passing through, okay, electrodes which will provide energy. Okay, so I'll show an animation of this at the end of this lecture, but eventually the Miller-Urey experiment ended up synthesizing four of the amino acids that are commonly found in proteins. Then you have urea and several simple fatty acids. So that means here that the input of energy and with the particular compounds that are thought to be prevailing on Earth, okay, uh, in early Earth, okay. So with the input of energy, this was able to produce the these particular molecules. Okay, so biomolecules, organic compounds, okay, the amino acids, urea, and simple fatty acids. Now, why is this important? Okay, so remember what I mentioned about the properties. Okay, you have fatty acids, if they somehow acquire a polar component, will then start to form membranes. Okay, and that is very important. Okay, so how could the subunits of biological macromolecules become sufficiently concentrated to form polymers prior to evolution of cellular life? So this is taken from Murchison meteorite, and they found these membranous vesicular structures formed by amphiphilic molecules or amphipathic molecules. Okay, so remember what I mentioned about phospholipids? Okay, they can form vesicles or compartments within an aqueous solution. So for phospholipids to form this membrane or these compartments, you have the phosphates that will be facing outward because they are attracted to water, and they seem to be protecting the hydrophobic tails, which are of course composed of fatty acids, nonpolar, hydrophobic, so they do not like water. So with that particular configuration, you now have a compartment, okay, with the hydrophobic tails facing inward, away from water, and then the hydrophilic components facing outward, okay, because they like water. You now have a compartment in an aqueous solution, okay. So what if there can be compounds that will be able to enter that compartment? You now have a protocell. Okay, so they can internalize amino acids and nucleotides, thereby promoting polymerization. So if, okay, these amphipathic molecules form these vesicles, and then somehow you have the building blocks, nucleic acids, you have amino acids, as well as monosaccharides. Okay, if they are trapped within this compartment, okay, then you now have the capability to produce polymers, okay, that will be confined to this particular compartment. Okay, so this is important, okay, this compartmentalization is important because if there is no compartment, then there will be no polymer formation because there is too much water. So remember what I said regarding the breakdown of polymers. Okay, it requires water, so too much water will lead to hydrolysis. But what if we have a compartment, okay, that uh, or a compartment within an aqueous solution, okay, and then you have the compounds within this, so they can now perform dehydration reactions instead. Okay. So how could nucleic acids have appeared without the enzymes that catalyze their synthesis? Okay, RNA has catalytic activity, so earliest enzymes could be RNA, and RNA thus was able to self-replicate. Now, this is important because we in the cells, okay, nucleic acids are replicated with the aid of enzymes. But enzymes, being proteins, okay, depend on the genetic information. So the enzymes cannot form without a sequence telling them, this is your particular sequence, and you will lead to this particular enzyme. Okay, so it's like a chicken and egg situation. So um, it's been proven that RNA is able to catalyze reactions. Okay, and that is best seen in translation, where you have the ribosome itself, okay, which has both protein and ribosomal RNA. So, aside from the other post-transcriptional mechanisms that eukaryotic cells perform, so basically, RNA is able to catalyze reactions. Now, what is the importance of catalysis? Okay, so I mentioned before that you need a lot of energy, okay, in order to produce polymers. Okay, so the Miller-Urey experiment demonstrated that you have when you have lightning, okay, you can force the atoms or molecules to rearrange or to join together. Okay, so the catalytic activity of RNA lowers the amount of heat or energy that is required for these reactions to proceed. So basically, you have nucleic acids, and if RNA somehow forms, it is now able to catalyze certain reactions. Okay, so then you wonder, how could enzymes have evolved, okay, without nucleic acids to encode their amino acid sequence? Okay, so natural selection uh, might be the answer. Okay, so natural selection simply acted on the structures with self-replicating and catalytic activity of RNA, and as natural selection continued to select for the best, or rather the survivors, okay, that are able to adapt to the conditions of the earth, okay, more and more efficient replicators were gradually evolved. Okay, uh, enzymes did evolve because proteins have more advantages over RNA as catalysts. Okay, so most of the enzymes that you will find in our body are made from protein. Okay, and then DNA is more stable than RNA simply because of the double-stranded nature of DNA. So RNA being single-stranded is not as stable. So um, yeah, together these ingredients came to produce the cell. So please do view the attached videos, okay, on this Clipper lesson, okay, if you did not really understand my explanations. Okay, and of course, with that, you need to have with the cell evolving, there will also be metabolic processes that will also evolve. So, earliest microorganisms might be heterotrophs. So, heterotrophs take nutrition from outside sources. Okay, so animals are a good example of that because we ingest, okay, nutrients or food from other sources. So, however, there are theories that say autotrophs might be the first one to evolve. Okay, autotrophs evolve with the acquisition or the evolution of enzymes that are capable of synthesis. Okay, such as carbon dioxide. Okay, the carbon from carbon dioxide being chained together to form glucose, or more specifically the G3P that will be joined together to form glucose, which is in photosynthesis. Now, um, photosynthesis, okay, if you might remember from your lower biology lessons, okay, will produce oxygen as a byproduct. Okay, so with the evolution of autotrophs, the atmosphere accumulated more and more oxygen. So, of course, you might remember at this point, the earlier you have the microorganisms, so something like cyanobacteria, okay, not plants, okay, not yet, no plants yet, okay. So, we have these micro or microbes that are capable of self food production, so the autotrophs, okay. And then finally, as the atmosphere accumulated oxygen, in yeah, okay, a particularly efficient method of producing energy also appeared. We call it oxidative phosphorylation. Okay, so well, for now, what you need to know about oxidative phosphorylation is that it is capable of recovering much of the energy that is stored in photosynthetic products. Okay, in short, oxidative phosphorylation is the process that is able to make the most adenosine triphosphate or ATP. And if you break down ATP, as mentioned, break the bonds between the phosphates in ATP, you have a lot of energy. Okay, so that's um, oxidative phosphorylation. That's what you need to know for now. Okay, so um, you have this biological time clock. So at 4 billion years, life has possibly evolved. Okay, at 3.8 billion years, you have the isotopic traces of life, and then you have um, approximately what is this 3.4 billion years, you have the oldest prokaryote fossils discovered. Okay, and the first evidence of photosynthesis at around 2.5 billion years. Okay, then the eukaryotes evolved around between so around 1.5 billion years ago, and then within 1 billion years, rapid evolution. So you have the formation of multicellular organisms, and then the formation of or evolution of terrestrial organisms, and then of course the more complex in terms of multicellularity. Okay, so these organisms also appear. So more on that, just watch the attached videos, okay, for a better explanation. So I'm discussing this because it's important to note that animals, being eukaryotic cells, only appeared within this biological time clock. So less than 1 billion years ago, okay, the sorry, these are the oldest eukaryote fossils. Apologies. So within this span of time, okay, the eukaryotic cell was formed and then somehow evolved the ability to um, produce cells that live together and cells that have become specialized. Okay, so let's discuss the appearance of eukaryotes. So this is important. Okay, the problem was, okay, how did the eukaryotic organisms arise? Okay, um, um, the there is a theory proposed by Margulis, okay, the endosymbiotic theory. So initially, the microorganisms were prokaryotes. That means they don't have a membrane-bound nucleus, and they acquired, or rather, they evolved uh, a nucleus from other intercellular membranes and enfoldings of the cell membrane. So you have this ancestral eukaryotic cell, and somehow they started to evolve an internal membrane system. Okay, so uh, specifically mentioned that anaerobic bacteria evolved this, and anaerobic bacteria, okay, are unable to metabolize or to use oxygen in oxidative phosphorylation. So they don't need oxygen, so to speak, to produce ATP. Okay. So for some reason, they ingested or they were parasitized by aerobic bacterium, those that require oxygen in order to produce a lot of ATP, and somehow they started to live together. So that's endosymbiotic theory in a nutshell. Okay? So why is this remarkable? Okay? The ingested organism eventually became the mitochondrion. Okay? And the mitochondrion is of course the powerhouse of the cell. Produces a lot of ATP, and being aerobic, okay, according to the theory, okay, they require a lot of oxygen. So um, yeah, so they became the mitochondrion. Now, the mitochondrion has its own DNA. Okay, so that's the same for the chloroplast. Okay, so for the photosynthetic organisms that are eukaryotic, like plants, okay, algae, so they also ingested photosynthetic bacterium that have the chloroplast. The chloroplast also has its own DNA. So in the end, you get the eukaryotic cell with chloroplasts. Okay? So this is important because, okay, um, animals are eukaryotic. Of course, we don't have the chloroplast, so we end up. So this is the eukaryotic cell that we have. Okay, so we are capable of breaking down polymers such as, let's say, starch into glucose. Okay, and plants are also capable of photosynthesizing. So basically what happened is that a mitochondrion and chloroplast were ingested by a bacterium that lacked both, or an sorry an yeah, a bacterium that lacked both. Okay, and then they started to live together in an endosymbiotic or mutually beneficial relationship, and that's how that's the most prevalent theory about the appearance of the eukaryotic cell. Now, for a for an introduction to the eukaryotic cell, okay, for now what you really need to know is that the eukaryotic cell has the membrane-bound nucleus. Okay, so you have mitochondria and chloroplasts, okay, in the case of photosynthetic organisms, but for since we're in the zoology class, we have the membrane-bound organelles such as the mitochondrion. Okay, so um, the burst of evolutionary activity that followed at the end of the Precambrian period and beginning of the Cambrian period was unprecedented. This coincides with the rise in, let's say, there was an increase in atmospheric oxygen, okay, So, when oxygen accumulated and oxidative phosphorylation became a thing, okay, and then of course this makes produces or gives more energy to organisms that are capable of oxidative phosphorylation. And with that capability to produce a lot of energy, which is of course needed for synthesis, then the evolution of larger multicellular organisms proceeded. Okay? So, somehow, okay, cells began to form colonies or became to come together. Okay? And then, for some reason, they also started to become more specialized. Okay? So, eventually, we have the animals which have highly specialized cells. For example, a neuron cannot perform the same function as a muscle cell. Okay, and this organization of animals, okay, could not be supported under conditions of limiting oxygen concentration simply because there are many cells that have their own specialized processes and they require energy as well. So if there is limited amount of energy, then the multicellular organism cannot also be supported. So that's how eukaryotes appear. Okay, so that ends my lecture discussion.